Hello, and welcome to another great episode of Ask Adam Live. Ask is the acronym for Always Seek Knowledge. That's what I hope this and each and every episode is, it's what it does for you, that it creates that spark of curiosity that you might seek to understand a little bit more about yourself, about the life around you, as well as about others, people that you interact with, whether it's one time or many times. Interestingly enough, today's subject is discussing emotional control under fire, the calm power. Let's get into the episode. Welcome, Calm Power, emotional control under fire. You know, when pressure rises, your response is what defines your power. Pressure doesn't create character. Quite frankly, it reveals it. Have you recalled maybe a heated conversation, maybe a high stakes decision? How about an unexpected problem that just sort of arose in your life? Emotional reactions you wish you could take back. That's a that's a big one. Maybe even put that under the parentheses of relationships. Although we talk about business a lot, I think each and every one of the things that we talk about can be applied to your life, not necessarily a relationship. Maybe it was a business relationship that kind of went sour because of a reaction. See, most people react, but it's the high performers who actually respond. I can share with you that I remember there was kind of a heated discussion. It was actually between a husband and wife, specifically in a real estate transaction. And it was a separation concern as well. And I mean, the tensions were really getting high. And I found myself always just standing there and being the pillar and reminding myself that it was a transaction. Although it's a relationship, and I took each one of my clients to heart and made sure that they got the best from my performance and what I did for them and what I provided, that in a certain way it did get kind of intimate. But this time I found myself constantly finding myself in that high performing position of having to step back and realize that it was just a transaction. And yes, there was a relationship individually with both of them, but the few times that they did have to get together, it got interesting. And always having to stand up and be the bigger person in the room, it's sometimes something you have to do. Hopefully, in sharing all of this with you, that you begin to practice the habits of making yourself a high performer in how you respond. You know, in these conflicting situations, you've got to, well, keep the main deal the main deal. I remember even as a business owner, leadership decisions sometimes were under stress. I was with some partners again in real estate, and you know, when that financial crisis of '08 was occurring, we sat down weekly to figure out the budget. And it got a little stressful where one party was adamant that our continuous presence in the local publications was demonstrating that we were still relevant and that we didn't fall apart. And that was kind of expensive at the time, and probably still is. But the marketing budget was really getting squeezed. And it was one of those decisions where I always asked, can we table it and talk about it tomorrow? Or not to put it off, but maybe can we get some more information and talk about it next week at the next meeting? Because if it was relevant, And if it was important, then other things would have to sacrifice as far as I was concerned. See, I was already practicing this under that stress, already thinking ahead to say I can't make a decision now, not under a stressful condition. I also wasn't trained at that time, and I can admit I was kind of young at business, at least what I knew. And of course, things constantly change, so I was learning really quick. It gave me the knowledge I have today, but I can tell you at the time, it was stressful. The moment where, emotions can change outcomes, that's where you need to have the highest muscle power as far as this strength to be able to say, let's table this. It's not as important as you think, or be strong enough to kind of take your head out of the game, make that decision, and then follow through. Today, I'll give you a 5-part calm power framework to stay grounded, think clearly, and lead effectively under pressure. Part one: what happens under pressure? Yeah, pressure, under stress, whether it's work or relationship. I think we all can agree that our heart rate increases, our breath shortens, and quite frankly, your thinking, well, it narrows. I know. You get wide eyed, you have all the answers, or you at least perceive that you're fully knowledgeable about, well, what's going on. And what ends up happening is emotions spike. And then your brain, well, it shifts into survival mode and you're not thinking clearly. So what happens is poor decisions. Words can escalate. And like I said, relationships can get damaged, even a business relationship. If you remember, I talked about in my neuroencoding teaching, some of the workshops that I do, is your thoughts, they drive your feelings. And then your feelings, well, that's what makes your reactions. And your actions, well, that creates your results. So if you don't control the first step, everything else downstream, well, it just reacts to the first one. So it starts with your thoughts. And remember, like I said, your brain automatically narrows. You your focus tightens up to pretty much the center of something. And if you find yourself maybe taking something personal, maybe something at heart, maybe something offensive, if you're taking all that and creating a thought, well, the rest of it's just going to drive itself and it turns into feelings that may not even be your own. You may even find yourself creating new feelings based on this particular thought. Or maybe because of this thought, you've enhanced from a previous thought. And now all of a sudden it's created new feelings, which drive a different reaction, which create different results. I'm almost certain from studies that I've read and the conclusion I've come to is if you ask most of the people, a high percentage of people who fell on their luck, maybe had a difficult situation, and maybe even I'll go as far as to say those incarcerated. If you were to ask them today and go back to that moment, they will most likely share with you that it started with an event similar to this. Now, I don't mean to scare you, but I just want to share with you that this can get pretty devastating. And quite frankly, it can get out of hand much quicker than you would ever imagine. And I say that, well, from personal experience. Your thoughts create the feelings, which drive the actions, render your results. They're not always good. So that's why I want to share with you. If you don't control the first step, that which follows downstream, not going to look so pretty. And kind of like toothpaste out of the tube, once that thought becomes a feeling and an action, you really can't put it back in the tube. It's just out there and it happens. So, how can we avoid this, both in relationships and in business? Well, that brings us to part two, the calm power framework. I talk about patterns all the time. First of all, you want to pause the pattern. You want to interrupt that automatic reaction. That may be a technique such as breathing and just stop, take a breath. It's in a situation, it's not rude, it's not weakness. In fact, it's strength to just pause, breathe, maybe take 4 breaths. Consider a moment of silence where maybe you count to 4 to yourself. This creates a physical reset, almost detaching you from the event before you. This is what we call pattern interrupts. And by doing this, again, like I said, you separate yourself from the situation. You get yourself at least briefly into that calm state through that method of separation. If you've been to any of my workshops, you've heard me talk about pattern interrupts several different ways. But this helps in this particular instance to break that emotional escalation because you kind of want to sever your thoughts, if you will, from what it is. And I know you're like, well, if I separate, maybe I'll forget. Well, that's kind of what you want to do is forget whatever the statement was. Say you're in a conversation. How about a negotiation? And there's a statement made. And you could take it personal, let your thoughts rage, and jump across the table in complete defiance of what someone offered. Or you could breathe, possibly count to 4, take even 4 breaths. Take that moment to reset and bring yourself back. I can almost assure you through the studies of neuroscience that you're not going to forget everything, but you are going to forget maybe how you're reacting to it and the thought process that you currently might utilize in a situation like this. So by separating yourself and then coming back to it and creating that pause, you can then come to it with not a narrow mind, but an open mind. I'll even give you a little tip. If you're afraid that you might forget, again, it's okay. Forget. This might even be a great opportunity to say, just so I'm clear, could you repeat that? I want to make sure I fully understand. Would you mind saying that again? Now, because you've reset, you're then going to hear it with completely different ears. And again, this is a pause, and it's not rude. In fact, it might even be respectful, depending on this particular situation you're in, to say, just so I'm clear, could you say that again? To me, that's respectful. That means you're valuing 150% of what that person is saying to you, and that you want to completely understand their position, in a calm sense, your position, and how you can best react to their statement, their offer, their negotiation. Step two, name the emotion. In that moment of silence to yourself, maybe ask, what am I feeling right now? Does this feel good? Tap into that intuition. How does your gut feel? Anger, frustration, fear, pressure that maybe you need to make this decision now. See, once you name it, it reduces the intensity. It also is going to create awareness. And quite frankly, this is giving you control. All while you are sitting there not doing a thing. That I think is the beautiful part, is that only you know what's going on. Maybe you stare out the window for a moment. Maybe you look at an object on the wall that is beyond the person that you're speaking with. Just to reflect out. Stare out into the beyond just for a moment. It's not being rude. In fact, the other person's probably observing you collecting your thoughts, and they are getting prepared themselves to be an intent listener to what you might be saying because you're taking this moment. So don't think that this is a moment of weakness, that what are the what if I'm not responding immediately? What will they think? Or if I don't have the right thing to say, or I say the wrong thing, then what will they think? You're overthinking it. And that's why I'm sharing with you today. This is all control on your part. It's what you have the ability to do. So name the emotion. Because once you understand whether it's anger, frustration, fear, or just pressure, like I have to do something, I have to answer something, you feel that obligation to come up with an answer. But if you name how you feel and you have that awareness of the feeling, well, now you have control as to whether or not you show and demonstrate that feeling. Because remember, you're still just sitting here in a chair or standing here and taking it in, breathing, counting to four, looking off into the distance. You may look down. I don't always recommend looking down. I recommend just looking at the person or maybe beyond the person. And that way you're at least attentive, that you're not in this thought of meditation, loss, or not knowing. See, this is a different attitude. You want to be up and looking and thinking. You can do this. I know you can. Step three is reframe the meaning. Instead of this is a problem, shift to this is a situation I can navigate. Maybe this is in that moment of silence again. Count to four. And then ask yourself, how do I navigate this? See, by reframing, this changes your internal state. Remember, as I said, you start to gain control and you're not losing power. In fact, just the opposite. You're gaining power with each moment. Remember, I said count to four. Four is strategic. Count 4 seconds. And if it takes four more, count another four. And if you're still collecting, count another four. Because nobody else is paying attention except for you, counting to four several different times. Now, I know you don't want this to go on too long, but it certainly is the moment to collect your thoughts and collect your feelings. And through this process is what starts to develop how you respond. And you could ask yourself, which is number four, choose your response. Asking yourself, what response serves the outcome? In this situation, as you've thought and considered, calming yourself down, understanding what the question is, and then consider what's the outcome? What do you want to see? Remember, you are in control. You don't want to be in the thought pattern of what do you feel like doing, because then you're gravitating back to your feelings. Feelings are good. Remember, like I said, you want to understand how you feel about something and you want to name it. But then you kind of want to separate yourself from your feelings. This is when true leadership shows up because you identify how it makes you feel, but then you separate that feeling. Maybe so, and maybe this is even something good. I know I feel like I've given a sense of bad. Like if you sit down and negotiate and somebody tells you something and it's something you don't like and you're understanding how you would react to that. On the contrary, what if it's something good? What if somebody tells you something wonderful? Do you want to jump up and down in your chair? Do you want to jump on the table? Do you want to get crazy excited and emotionally unstable over some really good news? I'm sure you want to respond in celebration, but true leadership doesn't do that. Good or bad, whatever the news is, you treat it like it's what you expect or that it's something you need to consider. And that's the same method either way. So say it's good news. Sit, breathe, count to four. How do you feel? Does this genuinely make you feel good? Or is it just that feeling of entertainment where you hear something exciting? It's kind of what you wanted, but you don't necessarily want to have that immediate emotion. Take it, count to four, name the emotion. I feel good. I feel excited, but I have some concerns. Well, if that's the truth, and again, because you can take good news and it can go sideways as well. You can say yes to something and realize it wasn't so great. So, in that point, counting to four, understanding the emotion. Hey, I feel good about this. This is exciting. This is what I always wanted. But oh, wait, what does this mean? I remember with a client that we had a contract. We were in negotiations and we had a contract. And they said yes to most everything. And I was kind of excited. It's like, wow, this is great. There's no haggling, no having to restructure anything. This is amazing. And in the calm quietness of sitting there and doing what I'm sharing with you, I realized it's going to mean a lot more work, going to a lot more time devoted to doing this. Like I'm agreeing to working harder. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not afraid of hard work, but it was in that realization that, wow, if this does go through completely the way I want it, my obligations have just changed from being to a relaxed state to now having to kind of run in high gear for a period of time and to fill my calendar with a lot of different things, which emotionally was going to take away from my free time. And was I willing to give that up? See, by stepping away from that narrow thinking, I realized the reality, although good, did have a backside to it that might not be so agreeable as far as the outcome I truly, absolutely wanted. But in this point of negotiation and being calm, well, that's where I had the opportunity to say, hey, all this sounds great. Could we adjust these dates a little bit? They seem kind of tight. And I want to ensure that, well, everyone can attend and that there's not too many scheduled conflicts. Would that be fair? Some dates got adjusted. My schedule wasn't so tight anymore, and things worked out. But see how that calmness, even with good news, allowed me to stay wide eyed, open minded, and consider all four corners of the decisions that were getting ready to, well, be made. Number 5, recover quickly. After this moment, you want to reset physically, reflect mentally, and learn strategically. See, high performers don't avoid stress, they just recover faster. Once you put yourself in this 5-step pattern where you first analyze how you feel, check your gut. Is this something you feel good or bad about? Check your thoughts. What are you thinking about at this moment? Is it a good thought or a bad thought? Like I said, maybe it's looking out the window. Maybe it's looking beyond the person at some artwork. Take yourself away for just a second. Create that scotoma, if you will, to then come back to the conversation. You'll see it much different, I assure you. And once you've developed this pattern of doing this, well, like everything else, it becomes habitual. You'll actually find yourself, as I do, chuckling. There I go again. I did it. Just as I have practiced several times and I'm doing it again. And you'll find that things aren't so stressful anymore. You feel a little bit more in control. And quite frankly, when you feel levels of control, that can't help but build your confidence. So when you step into these situations, even if they might go sideways, even if something unexpected occurs in that negotiation or that conversation, you immediately go to this reaction and calm things down. Part 3. Let me stress that calm is not passive. There's an important distinction. Calm is not weak. As I mentioned, it's control. Calm leaders speak clearly, act decisively, and maintain authority. Remember, When you're being quiet, counting to four, this is emotional control, not suppression. It's helping to direct, to even redirect. I remember one time, I'll share with you, and it was kind of seeing it in effect where I had practiced this several times, and I kind of felt good that I had this cutting edge, right? You learn something and you don't dare share it with anybody. You keep it as your little cheat code, if you will. And I remember we were negotiating some meeting dates, and we were in this pretty modern office, and it had the glass walls. And I remember a gentleman had walked by, and someone else had walked next to them, kind of in passing, and they turned around, and what appeared from the other side of the glass, I couldn't hear them. And I was on one side of the table so I could see over the people at the table. And I was looking through the glass wall, and I saw this individual having an interesting conversation. And some hands were moving around, and it just looked, well, like I said, from the glass, it looked a little heated. Little did I know that this individual that was kind of throwing their arms and getting a little boisterous, at least from what I could see, I couldn't hear them again. But when they turned around, they opened the door and walked into our room. And for a moment, even before anything was said, I was like, wow, I'm in the middle of somebody just got kind of tweaked up about something. I don't know if I want to, I don't want to be in that space with someone that is in that state. And they sat down and they looked out the window. They looked at me. They looked down the table where nobody was for a moment. And I looked back at them, and they were still looking at the end of the table. And then I looked to see, and the TV that was on the wall was off. It was kind of a vague part of the room. And I was just kind of sitting there. Couldn't quite figure out what they were looking at. And exactly, it was this moment of silence. And all of a sudden, they said, "Hey, I'm glad everybody was able to make today's meeting. And I know we don't have too much time. I'm sorry for the delay. Some things have come up, but I do want to make sure that we have this discussion and get things taken care of so that we can move forward." And although it was a serious moment, like I was negotiating for something, right? I'm supposed to kind of hold my ground and be serious. I found myself smiling and chuckling on the inside, really controlling my emotions. And I just remember that's my cheat code. They were counting to four. They were doing something. They were uttering a mantra to themselves. They were whatever, but they were present in the room to not keep us waiting any longer. But they literally sat there and reset themselves from the event which occurred in the hallway. I again, I didn't. I'm laughing now because it's funny to see your own teaching in action. And I didn't share this with them, but that's leadership. And I gained such immense respect for that person at the table. I actually had to perform this action again on myself just to separate myself because I was so just, I admired them. I was, wow, this is great. They have such great control. And then I realized I need to have that great control as well because I was feeling like they just demonstrated to me they have the upper hand because I recognize their control. See, it wasn't suppression, it was direction. They were disconnecting themselves from, well, what had just occurred and whatever emotions and thoughts and whatever was going on, to then resetting themselves, creating that scotoma. So now they could put our meeting in the proper perspective and give it direction. I hope you're finding this helpful. Like I said, you can apply this to several different things. Let's talk about some common mistakes because as you work on this, you got to understand that, well, there's some things that are going to throw you off course. So by being aware, well, it can help you be a little bit more prepared and to know the right direction to go into. So here are some common mistakes. Reacting instantly. Like I said, no matter what they say, no matter how they say it, pause, count to four, remember what they said, but disconnect yourself from maybe how they said it. Disconnect yourself from the emotions. And that if it's not counting to four, maybe it's, how do I feel about this? And think about that. Let that just kind of ruminate. It's okay. They don't need an answer any faster than you. You need the answer first. Then you can give it to them. Suppressing instead of processing. Again, when we react, maybe with a statement, we could be suppressing something that through that negotiation process, like we react instantly. So we're not processing something, but our mind is still absorbing it. We've still taken it in. And then all of a sudden, we begin reacting based on, well, what our brain perceived instead of us filtering it or stopping. So don't suppress it, process it. Take those few moments and just think. And again, if you forget the question or the statement that was presented to you, my favorite, just so I'm clear, could you share that with me one more time? I want to make sure that I completely understand. I think it's important for both of us. Now I'm listening with both ears, with a completely different mindset, a calm, no emotion state of listening. Remember, don't take things personal. It's always business. And even with people, it's business. Relationships are business. They're constant negotiations. I learned that when I dealt with partners in business. It was a relationship. It was. It was just as silly as, what do you want for dinner? I want chicken. I want fish. Where do we go? Sometimes things didn't matter. And I was like, yeah, we'll go where you want to go. And other times things did matter. And I did have some ground to stand on. And it was just like in a relationship. Should we go to the nice restaurant, spend a lot of money on dinner, or do something budget friendly to meet our goals in the future? Same thing with business. Do you spend a lot on advertising and marketing if that's the best direction to go? Or are there other opportunities that you should, quite frankly, be saving for? Again, don't take it personal. It's a matter of discussion. But you do have to disconnect yourself from the discussion. That helps alleviate it from being personal. Also, you don't want to try to win emotionally. Remember how I said you may get some news where you feel good? Well, don't get excited to be like, hey, they're coming my way. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in a situation, well, you can't get out of, or you can't negotiate anymore because you already said yes. And then once you go back to try to negotiate some more, shave a little off the top, as they say, well, then that sort of devalues your credibility. They've put you on a pedestal. They've agreed to something, and then you come back and say, hey, can we change these dates? Well, I don't want to say it shows weakness, but just shows that you want to change things afterwards. It's just not good negotiating. Another big mistake is avoiding those difficult conversations. When it does get difficult, again, take a moment, count to four. Another great phrase when someone says something that kind of takes the wind out of your sail, say, I'd like a moment to process that. And then be still, create that gap, and come back. It's a difficult conversation. And if you want to win at this process, well, you've got to build that skill of handling those difficult conversations and kind of working through them. I think you'll be surprised that once you create the scotoma, separate yourself, check in with your emotions, and understand truly, well, where you stand and your ability to stand in these situations, meaning what kind of ground are you truly on, then you can have those conversations and get the difficult out of the way and then work towards some level of improvement or a strategic direction. I remember a team member when I was working in supply chain. They kind of made a mistake. My initial reaction was frustration because I kind of felt like it was a mistake that they shouldn't have made. Like they kind of should have known better. It's almost an obvious should have known better. And then I wanted to blame them for not knowing the right way to do it. And that created a little bit of escalation in my mind where I needed to direct that specific individual. But my response, once I paused, considered the situation, I gave it some clarity. I went to the team member and said, I want to bring something to your attention. I clarified what I observed. I suggested, or actually, I stated what the correct way was to do it based on basically work practices. And then I coached them with some advice on how to do it a little better, do it their way, but doing it the right way. And the outcome, Well, the problem got solved, trust was maintained, and quite frankly, the performance improved. Again, because of the way it was handled, where I paused, collected my thoughts, separated myself from the situation, and I clarified with the team member, well, what the concern was, what the right way is to do it, and then coach them how they could do the right way with a little flair, with a little bit of their touch. So it wasn't like you did something wrong, here's the way to do it, and nothing else will be acceptable. We're all human, we all make mistakes. But sharing with someone not only the right way to do it, but a little hint of how it can be done better, or maybe even ask them, hey, now that you understand this is the right way to do it, how would you do it next time? And when they tell you how they would do something, now knowing kind of what the parameters are of the action, well, now they're kind of owning it. And that kind of ownership, well, that gives them confidence and pride that they're going to do it again the better way. So the problem solved, trust actually was created and maintained because they feel like they were winning. And in the long run, performance improves. So it's actually a win for the business. You can apply this to anything, relationships, business, or maybe even that casual conversation on the street. How many times have you seen those videos where people just get excited and all of a sudden you're like, wow, that really got out of hand? It's because of this, because we don't take a few moments to just consider how we feel, to then stage how we're going to react and create the outcome. Remember, your power isn't in controlling the situation, it's in controlling your response. This has been another great episode of Ask Adam Live. Look for the attached document and worksheet, and look for other episodes that share great and insightful personal and business information you can use every day.